Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lehman, and in this video, we're going to talk about bringing interactive whiteboards to higher education. You may more commonly know them as SMARTBoards, and around 2008, when I was in third grade, the first SMARTboard came to my school, and it was a big deal, right? We finally had this way of interacting with online games as a whole class and kind of switching out who's doing what. Additionally, my mom was the technology coordinator, and so around the time that SMARTboards came to our district, anytime I found myself in her office, I ended up being able to kind of play and explore, and I think that experience has left a lasting impact on how I've become an educator today. Throughout kind of the rest of my secondary education, SMARTboard came out with measurement tools, as you see on the left, which really helped in courses like high school geometry, right? My teachers were able to use the protractors, the compasses, the rulers on the board to draw straight lines, show us how to do constructions, show us how to use a protractor in a way that we could all see how to do it in our 3D space without feeling like their hands were always in the way from an overhead projector. And then on the right here, you see that it's a way that students can be engaged in the board, coming up to the board to answer problems, but also there's that ability to leave something there that's kind of more permanent to your whiteboard, and it doesn't get erased because it's part of text and digitized. So I think these as well kind of helped me see how they're used as a student tool, as a kind of reflective looking back. So if you jump to kind of my undergrad experience, as I'm, learning to be a 7-12 educator, K-12 educator, I'm finding myself in classrooms like the one on the left where there's a projector screen that may or may not be used, and then whiteboards and sometimes even chalkboards still. And that, it's really hard to demonstrate how you can embed technology into your lesson if you don't have an interactive whiteboard, since those are commonplace in K-12 classrooms today. You're kind of well, I would be writing this on the board with students, but this particular projector screen doesn't have dry erase capabilities or something like that, depending on the classroom that you find yourself in. And now I've actually moved into the higher ed realm, right? And so now what I'm finding is I'm filling up my whiteboards and I have more to say, and now I have to take that time to erase something I've already written, and maybe I need it for the same class that I'm teaching the next day or the next hour, and now I have to remember what I had written there because I needed that space again. Additionally, sometimes I find myself in a classroom like this where I have some whiteboards and I have a projector screen that I can write on, but that writing is something I've done physically and not digitally, and so it's not going to scroll along or move along with a presentation or a Word doc or whatever that I'm scrolling through, still kind of leaving that problem of something I'm going to need to erase at some point, right? And I can't really keep it for anything either. So that's kind of why I feel like the future of higher education is kind of bringing these whiteboards, interactive whiteboards of any brand, to both classrooms and office spaces. This image kind of depicts more of an office space, but as you can see, right, students can manipulate calculations, they might be able to create brainstorming lists. You can have two individuals up at the whiteboard at the same time and be able to use both halves of the whiteboard in different ways or the same way to create community, create that student engagement, student interaction. Additionally, as I said, having these there to prepare your future K-12 educators for their careers being able to practice with something as a teaching tool, develop those transferable skills. I had, the luxury of being a substitute teacher, and so I saw all the different brands, the SMARTBoards, the ViewSonics, the Clear Touches throughout my experience as a substitute teacher, but not all of our future K-12 educators have that ability either. And so I think it's really imperative that, if we're supposed to be preparing them for their career, why do we not have the tools to prepare them for such a career? There's also benefits on, the professor side of things, right? So you could take this diagram and actually write and label things on it as you go. You don't have to, have a pre-prepared slide, and, you could be able to ask your students and say, like, what are some parts of a heart that you know of? And they might say something like a ventricle or an atria, and you could, in real time, point to where those are on that diagram and label them, rather than trying to predict with slide transitions which of those terms the students are going to throw out first, right? There's also, as I said now, endless, limitless whiteboard space. You can always create more whiteboard space, change the screen that you're on to keep writing, and that's going to keep your students engaged in your class. You're not wasting that time erasing whiteboard space and letting them have a moment to disengage with your course, or not wasting any time in a really tight hour-long course window. Other thing that you can do is you can download and save these whiteboards. You can either download it, before you've written what you want to write in class so that you can reuse it for the following year, section, semester, whatever. But you can also download it again after you've written on anything in case a student has an accommodation plan that requires them to have notes after class. So those are kind of those benefits, so you're not trying to remember what you talked about in a class either. So if you're watching this and you're a professor, your next steps are probably to start talking to your admin and, advocating for these being on your campus. If you're watching this as an admin, maybe start looking at your campus map and thinking, where are some classrooms that are used quite often and frequently throughout the year? Where are the classrooms where, if you have a K-12 educator program, that those classes are being held so we can better support those students? And then starting to look at, the money side of it, determining which brand, whether that's the SMARTBoard, the Vibe, the Clear Touch, etc., that are going to have the best features for your institution. And I'll have some links down below to where you can find out what some of those features are. But starting to kind of make those business deals, seeing if there's grants out there, figuring out your timeline, etc. So overall, I think that through the introduction of more interactive whiteboards on college and higher education campuses, we are bringing higher education into today's world with increased student accessibility and engagement. See you next time.